for Shabbos. So what I thought we could do today is a tshuva from Rav Moshe, just to back up a little bit. We were talking about the Yisachar-Zvulun relationship, and Ron, I think, had asked the question, where does this come from? Like, what's the basis for this? That I learn Torah all day, and I give you half of my reward, and you support me. And we saw this debate among the poskim. When you work, you Zavulun, you go out to work and you support me. Do you give me only enough that what I need as a salary? Or do you literally have to split your income with me? So, like, what's the basis of this kind of discussion? That's right. That's right. So this is, so Rav Moshe wrote this in 1982. The Inyan Esak Yisachar Zvulun Halacha L'Maisa. And he's writing it to Harav Hagon Marenu Harav Simcha Halevi Soloveitchik Shalom Uvracha La'olam Kishahuva Ashela Zulifnei Maran Zecher Tzadik B'Kadosh Livracha Hayasham Hagon Rebbe Aaron Yafhan Zatzal V'Iyin B'She'ela V'Hosif Midilei Od Nekudos Le'iyun She'Hityaches Elehen Moran Zatz Zecher Tzadik B'Kodesh Lebracha B'Tshuva Zu Toch Hashelos Sheshol Harav Simcha Soloveitchik Shlita. It sounds like they're publishing this tshuva posthumously. Okay, so the question is, Biur Sheshutfas Yisachar Zvulun Eina Me'inyan Tzedakah Klal. The first thing that Rav Moshe wants to discuss is that the Yisachar Zvulun relationship is not a mitzvah of tzedakah. Inyan Yisachar u'Zvulun hanizkar b'Rashi b'Reish Zvachim. So first of all, where does this come from? So Rav Moshe is going to give us several sources. He says, it says in Zvachim at the very first page, Shimon Achi Azariah, just identifying the name of one of the sages. His name was Shimon Achi Azariah. Now that's a very unusual name for a rabbi to say, the brother of so-and-so. Al Shem Sha'azarya Asak B'Prachmatya, B'Sipek Tzarchei Shimon Achiv B'Shah Shahaya Osek B'Torah. So Rashi says that why was he called Shimon Achi Azariah? Because Azariah was a businessman, and he took care of his brother Shimon when he would study Torah. V'hisnu B'neihen, and they agreed between them that Azariah would have a portion of Shimon's learning. That there's a value, I guess, is what the Gemara in Sota says, based on the pasuk that if a man will give all of the wealth of his household. Lo Shimon Achi Azariah, Lefichach Nikra al Shemo Shalomad al Yado. And the Gemara there actually quotes Shimon Achi Azariah as an example of a person who was willing to part with his wealth in order to obtain the reward for Torah study. And therefore, Nikra al Shemo Shalomad al Yado. And therefore, Shimon, who was the sage being quoted in the Gemara, is cited as the brother of Azariah, because Azariah was the one who supported him and enabled him to learn Torah. So that's one source.
Rabbi, could you put up online?
Oh, I beg your pardon, Ron. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thanks for asking. This was actually in response to your question. What is the source for the Yisachar Zvulun relationship? Okay, so we're doing a tshuva from Rav Moshe about that very subject. Okay, so far we have one source. Rashi tells us that this was why a rabbi named Shimon was known as Shimon Achi Azariah. And then Rashi also brings it from Uve Perish HaChumash B'Parshas Vayechi, on the pasuk Memtes, Perik Memtes pasuk Gimel, that Rashi tells us of this relationship. Shahaya Zavulun osek b'pragmatia umamsi mazon l'shevet Yisachar. That the tribe of Zavulun were businessmen, and they would provide provisions for the tribe of Yisachar. Behem oskim b'Torah, who would study Torah. Husha Amar Moshe Samach Zavulun b'Tzeisecha v'Yisachar ba'Ohalecha. That's why Moshe said about the two tribes, rejoice, Zavulun, when you go out to get to do work, and Yisachar in your tents, Yisachar when you're in your tents of Torah study. Zavulun Yotze b'Pakramata v'Yisachar Osek b'Torah b'Ohalim. Okay, so that's another source. Now we have another source from Rashi, Uveparshas Bracha, Vizos HaBracha, Perak Lamed Gimel Pasuk Yitches, that very pasuk, Samach Zavulun b'Tzeisecha v'Yisachar b'Ohalecha, Zavulun v'Yisachar asu shutfus, Zavulun l'chof yamim yishkan, as the pasuk says that Zavulun will go out to the beaches by the ocean, and v'yotze leprakmatya bisfinos, and he would go do business on ships, umistaker v'notein l'toch piv shel Yisachar, and he would make a profit, and he would provide for the mouth of Yisachar. In other words, he would provide provisions. V'heim yoshvim v'oskim b'Torah, and Yisachar's tribe would study Torah. Leficha chiktim Zavulun liYisachar, shetarasu shel Yisachar al yedei Zavulun haisa. And that's why Zavulun's blessing comes before Yisachar's, because it is only via Zavulun that Yisachar had the wherewithal to study Torah. Now, says Rav Moshe, now that we understand what the sources for this principle are, we've got three Rashis that tell us that this is a thing. So, hu barur upashut she'eno mimitzvos tzedakah. The first thing I want to clarify, says Rav Moshe, this is not a mitzvah of tzedakah to provide for Yisachar. Dechi chas v'shalom shevet Yisachar hayu aniyim. You think that one of the tribes of Israel, an entire tribe of Israel, were paupers? V'hagam l'shevet Yisachar hayichelak be'eretz Yisrael. V'lokach nachla kamo Zavulun v'chol hashvatim. After all, Yisachar was a landowner. The entire tribe owned property, and they had as much of a portion in the land of Israel as Zavulun and all the other tribes. Umefurish b'Yehoshua nachalas Yisachar sheyatza b'goral harivi'i, and it says in Sefer Yehoshua that Yisachar's portion was done in the fourth lottery. Uverashi b'Perish HaChumash b'Birkas Moshe Rabbeinu Isal al Hakra ki shefa yamim yinaku shekasav shehush al shneihen, that it says that they will suckle from the bounty of the oceans, is a reference to both Yisachar and Zavulun. The Perush, the Yinaku B'Lashon Rabim hu Yisachar Zavulun, the Yehelem Panai Lasok B'Torah, that they will both benefit from the business that is made in the oceans through Zavulun's commercial trade overseas, and that will give Yisachar the time to study Torah. But it's not that they're poor, but it's that rather they have bounty because Zavulun is splitting whatever he has with Yisachar. Ve'al hakra de sefune temune chol, Piresh Rashi, Toris v'chilazon uzuchuchis levana hayotzim min hayom min hachol, uv'chelko shel Yisachar Zavulun haya. It says actually that Yisachar and Zavulun both were by the coast, and that they both had these resources, Taris and Chilazon and Zuchuchis Levana. So I know Chilazon is the dye for the snail. Zuchuchis Levana is from very white sand. You can draw out crystal. I don't know what Taris is. I don't know what that word means over here, but it's some kind of maybe it's a certain kind of fish that can be used for consumption. Okay, you can look it up and find out. He says, now it's true that our Gemaras do not contain that information, because the Gemara in Megillah and Daf Vav Amud Aleph says, Omar Zavulun Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ribono Shel Olam Le'achi natata lahem sados uchramim belina sata harim ugvaos. That Zevulun says to Hashem, Ribbono shel olam, to my brother you gave fields and vineyards, and to me you gave me mountains and valleys. Amar lo kulan srichen lach al yidei chilazon shenemar sefune temunei chol. He says, so God responds to Zevulun and says, don't worry, your land may not be primed for agriculture, but because you're on the coast, everyone will need you because of the chilazon, which is the snail that produces the dye that is used for not only for tzitzis, but for a lot of industry. Okay, mashma shalarashi haisa hagirsa kazu. It sounds like only Zevulun had the coastal territory with all of those resources. V'ulai gam larashi lo haisa girsaso b'gemara el Zevulun, aval mekeven shekasav temunei chol v'imrak b'chelko shel Zevulun haya zeh. He says, now it is possible that Rashi might hold that Yisachar maybe didn't have a coastal portion with all of those resources. Okay, that's possible. Shelachein over Rashi shemuchroch lomar dezer koy al chelko shel Yisachar shebechol nimtza zuchuches levana v'yinimtza rak b'chelko shel Yisachar. But it seems like Rashi still holds that Yisachar had a certain fine white sand where you could extract fine crystal. Shahare Rashi ba'atzmo masik al mashakasav v'chelko shel Yisachar zebulun haya k'mo shamru b'maseches Megillah rak mashana mer sham al zebulun. Al kol panim mefurish b'kroi shegam shifto shel Yisachar lahaya anim shezebulun utzrach leparnas amidin tzedakah. But at least we recognize, no matter what girsa we're going to use, that Yisachar's tribe was not poor. They had what to live off of. It's not like they were paupers. And even if you're going to argue that Zebulun took care of them, because they split everything that Zebulun made, but Yisachar lived with plenty. It's not that they lived in squalor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it could be it's a machlokus. I don't know. That's also unclear whether it's only the majority of Yisachar. What if I was born into Yisachar and I didn't have Zitzfleisch for learning, right? Yeah. Or what if I was from Zevulun and I wanted to sit and learn? So, okay. All valid questions. Let's just see what he says. The main thrust of his point here is that it's not that we should look at Yisachar as being aniyim, as Nebuch cases. The imkain hu kematnas ish ashir lachabero ha'ashir mitzad reyus hu chedoma shelo shayich zeh mitzvah tzedakah. The fact that Yisachar had natural resources, the fact that Scripture describes them as having blessing, indicates that it's not that Yisachar was poor, but rather Zevulun gave him a gift, just like a wealthy man would give another wealthy man a gift. Ve'ein al zeh memela schar shenemar b'torah or mitzvah tzedakah. So you can't say that if you enter into a Yisachar-Zevulun relationship, that you receive the same reward that you do for the mitzvah of tzedakah. V'ula yesh gam al zeh schar avor inyan hasholom ve'ahava shegorem zeh beinehem. Maybe you could argue that the reward that Zevulun gets is through the generation of love and peace among brothers. Ve'imhu l'talmud chacham ika bazeh mishum kvod haTorah ve'isyakurehu demisyaker hanosein lo. If you're giving a gift to a Talmud Chacham, even though he's not poor, you also show a kavod to the Torah, and that also is a prestigious thing to do. Kahad de'isa b'kedushin daf zayin she'isha miskadeshes bazeh shenasna matana la'adam chashuv be'ahi hana t'kamekabel matana mina gamra umakna yelei nafsha. Like we know that a person attains prestige from giving a gift to a Talmud Chacham, and by the fact that if a woman gives a gift to a Talmud Chacham, and he says to her, this is Gemara in Kiddushin, He says to her, Hareat mikudeshes li bahana azu. I will graciously accept your gift, madam, but with the benefit that you receive from my accepting your gift, I want that to be the kedushin. That's what I'm giving you. Now there is a quid pro quo. When you give me a Talmud Chacham a gift, I give you the benefit of accepting your gift, and so you actually receive a non-tangible benefit, which could allow a woman to be mikudeshes through that. So, if that's the case, then Zavulun is getting a good deal, and should not be considered to be an altruistic act of tzedakah. Uketsas kashal Rabbi Zera b'chulin sof daf mem dalid dichi havu mizamnin lei miberesh galusa azil mitam de isyakru misyakri bei velo hayashakil ki mishadru lei mishum desone matanos yichya. It's a little bit difficult to understand. There's a story about Rabbi Zera in Maseches Chulin. Whenever they would invite him to visit the Reish Galusa, the exilarch, the house of in Bavel, the leader of the Jewish community, he would go because he knew that by going, he would be giving them prestige. He would be giving them the benefit of having his presence with them. But he never would accept gifts from them because of the principle of Sonei Matanos Yechya. He who despises gifts shall live. Ha b'kiddushin, I read the nasna lo kesef. Shegam kein imhu adam chashuv ikola hana the chashivus nesinas kesef lehanos mikabalaso. Bim kein madua lo kibel mehem Rabbi Zera mitam ze atzmo. He says, if Rabbi Zera was willing to accept gifts from them, in other words, he says, I don't understand. Yeah, there's a principle of Hasone Matanos Yichya, but why wouldn't Rabbi Zera accept their gifts? Because he would be giving them more benefit than perhaps the gift was worth by giving them the honor of having a great scholar like himself accept their gift. V'ulai Rabbi Zera lo haya machshiv atzmo l'chashiv kol kach shia lanosin hana b'kabalasa. It could be because Rabbi Zera didn't consider himself that chashuv, that the gift that they were sending him would be equivalent in value to the benefit that he was giving them by accepting their gift. He would only go when they invited him to dine with them, because that he felt that there was a tangible benefit of his presence with them. He says, but we also know that great Torah scholars would accept gifts privately without the public knowing about it, knowing that it was beneficial to the giver, that the giver felt gratified by allowing the rabbi, this great rabbi, to accept his gift. The Aisile Hahu Gavra Kinta de Gildani de Vegili Shekibel Mimenu Kesharmlo Hanosin Shehebilo Zem Achmas Shenesinas Matanal Tamil Chacham Hu Keikruve Bikurim. There's a story about Rav Anan that a man once brought him a basket of some kind of very valuable produce. And Rav Anan accepted the basket from him because the person presenting it to him said that I feel like giving you this basket of whatever it was is like giving bikurim to the temple. So Rav Anan said, listen, I don't like to accept gifts, but if this guy feels so gratified by my acceptance, right. So Rav Anan felt that he was doing the guy a favor by accepting his gift. You have to learn how to be a gracious recipient, right? And that's, sometimes it's difficult for people to graciously accept things. I have a big problem with it, but you have to learn that it's an important thing to do sometimes when you know that the giver feels gratified through that gift. So as a result, what you see here is that it's not really considered tzedakah. This is another example of how there's actually a real quid pro quo. There's an exchange of goods. One is a tangible good, one is an intangible good. Aval vadai kishenosein echad matana lechaver yoter meharagil leka shum schar al zeh. But obviously, if you give your friend a gift more than the norm, there's no can you say oh, I gave him a gift and now we're great buddies. So that in itself is the reward that I've done a mitzvah of creating friendship between two people. He says it depends. If you give someone an extravagant gift, you're not going to get any reward for that. Number one, there's no, you could have given him a $10 gift and you would have generated the same shalom between two people, and instead you gave the guy something really extravagant. So you're not adding anything to the shalom between two friends. And it could be also that when you give someone an extravagant gift, the chachamim aren't happy with that. The ha'af b'shah shekotev nedunya levito b'shas nisu'eha shehu takanta derabanan ein ruach chachamim nocha kishenoten yoter midai b'ksuvas reish daf nun gimel. He says that the Gemara in Ksuvas says that even though providing a dowry for your daughter's marriage is something that the rabbis told us to do, when we marry off our daughters, we're supposed to provide a dowry. But the rabbis are also critical of someone who gives an excessive dowry. Because by giving that amount to your daughter, you're deducting what your sons are entitled to in the Yerusha. You're deducting from the estate. So it's a form of, the rabbis say, listen, give your daughter a nice dowry, but don't exhaust the estate through that in that process. And certainly that would apply to providing extravagant gifts to strangers. I mean, people who are not your family. He says, as the rabbis are not happy when people just squander their assets. And even to give the mitzvah, to do the mitzvah of tzedakah with more than a fifth of your assets, the rabbis didn't want you to do. And so therefore, certainly if it's not tzedakah, how can you cut out half of your income, half of your assets for something that's not tzedakah? So this is all building up to a question of how we can justify the Yisachar Zvulun partnership. Because if indeed you're giving half of your assets to your brother Yisachar, that seems to be over the top. You can't just call that a gift. Maybe I've told you it's not tzedakah because Yisachar wasn't poor. But what justification do you have to give him half of your assets? He says, for sure, there's nothing wrong halachically with spending a little bit of extra money for your own personal living, for yourself and your family. Rak miderach hamusar is only like a musar thing that you should live with histapkut, with living, with less. Dahalo matzinu mishi yazgir takanas usha gam beinyane rishus tahotzasu lachila luksus shelo yehiyeh yoter mechomesh. Certainly, no one's ever suggested that you shouldn't spend more than 20% or a fifth of your assets on your own personal needs. The takana was only not to spend more than that on mitzvos that are not for yourself. So therefore the question returns. If it's not tzedakah, and it's not for yourself, but it's for a person who's your brother, then what justification is there to part with half of your assets to support your brother? B'dochak lomar she'Azarya achi Shimon haya asher gadol shebepachos mechomesh pirnaso l'Shimon b'chol tzrachav lo li'ishto b'zaro shehaya le'lahazker be'ezeh makom. And it's difficult to suggest that this rabbi Azariah, who was that Azariah, the guy who supported the sage Shimon, was so wealthy that he was able to provide all of his brother Shimon's needs by giving him even less than 20% of his income. Because if that were the case, the Gemara should have mentioned that. So in any event, Rav Moshe is left with a bit of a quandary. What is going on here? What if it's not tzedakah because Yisachar is not poor? What right does a person have to part with more than well over 20% of his income to support his brother? So the answer is in Beis, he says, Bira shutva shebein Yisachar lezvulun shezavulun haya toreach bechelko uvechelko shel Yisachar becholkim berevach shel shtei hanachalos. So that's just the title of this next section. He says that it really is a partnership. It's like going into a business venture with a partner. Ela hanachon bazed the inyan Yisachar zvulun lo haya klal inyan tzedakah. The answer is that it wasn't tzedakah at all. V'lo haya yachol zvulun litein lo klum misach tzedakah shahid tzarich litein. And it would not have been legal for Zvulun to take from his meiser money to provide for Yisachar. Ela shahaya ze inyan shutfus mamish. But it was rather a partnership, a literal partnership. Shezavulun nasan li Yisachar kol schar hapolim v'hasados v'chol ma shahaya tzarich Yisachar lahashlim b'malachos degavri. That Zvulun paid for all of the business expenses, all that Yisachar, if he were a real partner, would have had to have shared in that burden. The gam kevin shahagavri laholchu mibateim and bibeis hamedrash, harei lo yachlu gam hanashim leilech lesados. The harei tzrichos l'shamesh ba'alehen uvenehen af kishem gedolim v'malachos da'afia ubishul uchedome v'gam lahavi mashet tzarech liknos. And that meant that Yisachar, when the men of Yisachar, when they went to the Beis HaMedrash, their wives couldn't work either because they had to provide for the needs of the household. He says, and that was all part of Zavulun's cheshbon, about how much he had to pay to Yisachar. And he made a calculus based on all of the costs of his business and the profits that were above that. And they split evenly profits from the company. And Zavulun had to make sure that Yisachar and Yisachar's families were taken care of. So that's the way Rav Moshe understands. It was literally a partnership. And that's why we saw in this Hilchos book that we're learning that according to Rav Moshe, because it's an equal partnership, you can't just give Yisachar a salary. You have to split all of the business profits with the Yisachar in this, if you're going to structure it properly. And all the fifth Torah, the schar for the Torah learning, Zavulun gets 50%. The kevin shelo haya inyan tzedakah yutzrichim lahasnos v'hisnu alofen zeh. And because it wasn't tzedakah, that's why they had to have a contract between them to sort of delineate what was going on. The nimsa shelo haya nosein Zavulun liyisachar mechza sholem mikol ma she'herviach. The hazavulun natal gam mechza mikol ma she'herviach Yisachar misadosav u'michol shelo shahaya nimsa sham zuchuchis levana. But what does turn out to happen is that Yisachar and Zavulun entered into an equal partnership that they would divide all assets between them. And if Yisachar, in the course of, even though he was learning all day, They still had natural resources on their property of this white crystal that we quoted from the Gemara. Then Zevulun would also get 50% of the sales of that white crystal from Yisachar's property also. Shemin hasados v'haginos v'habehema shel Yisachar haya lizvulun eza chelek ha'aretz v'kablan. And all of the whatever properties and whatever animal products, the whatever agricultural products that Yisachar was able to produce while he was learning full time, he had to split with Zevulun. The Game has, I guess they're hiring. They're probably hiring workers.
Why do this whole process in the first place? They have money.
Because Zevulun is traveling and out of town, and it may be because Yisachar's yield is not as great as Zevulun's. The assumption is that Zevulun is making much more than Yisachar, but it doesn't mean that Yisachar is not making anything. They're making something. Yeah. Yeah. They don't define it.
And in secular law, so partnerships, the default is 50-50. If you have two partners, it's normally split 50-50.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Right.
It could be 1/3, 2/3 also. Right?
It's theoretically possible, and we did see that brought in that Sefer Hilchos Tzedakah. We'll have to hold it here for today. Let's hopefully maybe we can continue this discussion next time. It's a long tshuva, so I don't know how much of it we'll be able to go through. But I do want to point out that Rav Moshe says it's not a mitzvah of tzedakah. But I'm not sure if everyone agrees to that. Yeah, it is some kind of arrangement.